Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. Thank you for tuning in. On the show this evening,
Cabinet met last night and took the decision that we must move towards ending the national state of disaster.
South Africans have 48 hours to influence the government's decisions on the future of the state of disaster. We bring you the initial responses to the draft regulations published this afternoon and to which the public must now respond. With 2 days to go before the big switch off, we speak to the Communications Minister about the state of readiness, including the numerous issues that are being raised by community organizations and broadcasters. All that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. The end of the national state of disaster could be as early as next week. Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma has announced that the national state of disaster will likely be lifted before the 15th of April. Government has invited public comment on the new regulations that are to guide the country in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Dlamini says this is the government's way of ensuring that the gains made were not wasted by ending the national disaster abruptly.
What is proposed is that when the national state of disaster ends, there should be some regulations that will remain for not more than 30 days that will assist in the transition. And those regulations are going to be gazetted, and we are going to ask the public to comment for at least 48 hours. And then we'll see what the comments say. And those will be analyzed. And then the final decision will be taken to end the national state of disaster. And the president will then announce when that time comes. There are certain things that were introduced through the Disaster Management Act, which need to continue for some time, not more than 30 days, like the payment of 350 will continue, but will be removed from the national disaster after 30 days has lapsed, and will continue through other means.
UDM President General Bantu Olomisa last week convened a meeting of opposition party leaders where ending the state of disaster was a big part of the agenda. He joins us on the line. Good evening, General.
Good evening, Mvogo, Vuyo, and good evening to our viewers.
Well, we have 48 hours to influence the government's decisions, or whatever the government may decide on ending the national state of disaster. What's going to be your contribution?
Well, Vuyo, this looks like it's just an exercise to save somebody's face. I sense that there might have been a revolt from within the party members at NEC level who would have said, why are you pussyfooting while other countries are removing this and you are affecting the economy? And all what they are doing is to create a permanent state of disaster scenario as I see it. They are doing, what they are doing, in fact, is to transfer some of the provisions in the Disaster Management Act into the Health Act. Minister Zuma is out of order. She is tonight gazetting these so-called regulations, and yet he expects South Africans, let's say about 65 million to be conservative, million South Africans to comment on these regulations within 48 hours. What kind of rubbish is this? Is she services? Is she serious, or expect us to just rubber stamp their uninformed decisions? Surely they are targeting their bogus civil society who have access to IT systems. Unohombile noma mtolo ongapha emkanduli, even noqeba ongapha eLimpopo okhokhela abantu will not understand what they are doing. They won't even have time. They must follow what is happening in other 22 countries in the world, countries like England, Gabon, Mexico, Ireland, etc., which have dropped all COVID protocols. It means, therefore, that there is no need for PCR tests in those countries. Yet, they have more COVID cases than us. So these guys are confused.
So from where you sit, nothing short of dropping all the protocols will satisfy you?
President Cyril Ramaphosa should have lifted this last week. He lost an opportunity. They are trying to capture the lost ground, but they are being pressurized, I'm sure, by their own structures. And indeed, they are scared of the pending court cases challenging their ineptitude on this matter. So drop all protocols, because there is no disaster as we speak. You invoke that legislation when there is a disaster. Ask President Ramaphosa and Nkosazana Zuma and their cabinet, Lipi cabinet, as to whether there is a disaster in South Africa.
I want you to listen to what the initial reactions from other political parties, including the ANC General.
We do welcome the announcement made, also because as the government gets towards really doing away with the state of disaster, it has also have to make sure that that transitioning of social protection is also carried forward in a manner and way that is not disruptive, and in a manner and way that makes people understand that these were really interventions by our government to make sure that they are given the necessary social protection and social relief during a period when we were all united behind dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We commend government and call on all our people to use the opportunity of this public comment window to be able to add on what they believe could be done going forward should we come to face situations such as the ones that we will ultimately be out of come the 15th of April. And we're hoping that our government in ultimately taking us out of the state of disaster completely, they will have done everything else in their powers to make sure that South Africans of various creed and faith are equally protected and understand and submit to all of the efforts that government has announced, especially your non-surgical ones like wearing of masks when people are indoors, social distancing, sanitizing our hands from time to time. We should not let our guard down. We should live as though we are still under COVID conditions. Because if we do that, we will be able to ultimately emerge victorious against this pandemic.
Well, I think it's significant that the minister made the concession that COVID-19 no longer conforms to any statutory definition of a disaster. So there was apparently an emergency cabinet meeting where it was decided that this must end. And while the president has said that it will end and that there will be measures to replace the national state of disaster, it's been long in coming. And apparently there's been serious division in cabinet. So the DA regards this as government finally yielding to months of public and political pressure. We do believe that the state of disaster will end as soon as next month.
Well, the comments sort of broadly welcomed, yes, perhaps a little too late, according to the DA, but they still welcome the move, nevertheless, General.
No, there's no harm in welcoming the lifting of these regulations or the state of disaster, whatever you want to call it. We have been calling it for ages. I'm happy that the Johnny Come Late spokesperson of the ANC is now, for the first time, is coming out to say go as well. But as I said, I suspect that this was just an exercise to save somebody's face. Pressure now being coming from within their own ranks, because it never made sense. But in any event, late as it is, we welcome the ANC that at least they have seen the light.
Well, you are not among the people you mentioned who may be in the Eastern Cape but with no access to technology, or in Limpopo. But will you do your bit? In other words, will you be commenting on these regulations over the next 24, 48 hours?
Take what I've said now as the position of the party. We discussed this when we were listening to Nkosazana Zuma, that it is unfair to expect South Africa to give them only 48 hours to comment. So it shows how they have been manipulating other laws in this country. When you go to the constituencies, people are saying, my son, you are taking my rights now to say I cannot look after my child. How do you justify that a 10-year, 13-year-old can get pregnant and also conduct an abortion without consulting me? This is un-African. These are the kind of laws we have in this country. It shows you when you give people 48 hours to comment, it's not fair. But anyway, we are asking those who have access to internet facilities and computers to represent those poor who have no access, that this thing must go, because it has changed the lives of the people for the bad.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for your time this evening, General Bantu Misa, the president of the United Democratic Movement, joining other party leaders who have so far commented on the comments that were made by Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who said this afternoon that the national state of disaster will likely be lifted before the 15th of April. But there are regulations that have been gazetted today to which all of us as the public are expected to comment, which will then inform or better inform the government as it takes a final decision on the matter. On the football front, fans in the country have some good news to celebrate this after the Premier Soccer League today made the much-awaited announcement that people will be allowed back into stadiums. This 2 years after a ban on fan attendance in stadiums was imposed as a measure to prevent the spread of COVID-19. PSL Chairman Evan Khoza announced the decision today and emphasized that only those with vaccination certificates will be allowed in stadiums.
It was during the last Soweto derby played at the Orlando Stadium that fans staged a protest outside calling for the league to allow them back into stadiums. And with limited numbers of people allowed to attend gatherings, questions were asked regarding the continued silence of the league on the matter. But with the government announcing amendments to Act which prohibited fans from attending matches last week, the league said and made the decision.
The amended regulations permit spectators to return to professional football matches subject, firstly, the use of only 50% of the stadium capacity. Those permitted entry providing a valid vaccination certificate or negative test which must have been obtained more than 72 hours or not more than 72 hours.
Khoza has stressed that protocols will, however, still have to be observed and that the league and clubs will have to meet their legal obligations.
Having regard to the matters that must be attended to ensure lawful and safe return of spectators, the league has earmarked the Nedbank quarter-final matches of the 8th and 9th of April as the first matches that will be open to spectators. Standing here in front of you, it will be difficult for us to start this weekend, as I've indicated that most of those matches already have been categorized and approved.
Khoza revealed that a lot of revenue was lost during the time that fans weren't allowed to attend matches and commended clubs for soldiering on during the difficult time. Pesinkato, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, please welcome now the CEO of Stadium Management South Africa, Betty Globerer. Good evening, Mr. Globerer. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Good evening, Buyo. Only a pleasure.
Well, we heard what the PSL has just said. What does this mean for your organization?
Yeah, we're not 100% there yet, but a massive stride towards normality for our company and for the events industry. As the chairman announced today, from the 9th, we'll be allowed to host 50% spectators at the different stadia, subject to the Disaster Management Act regulations that was promulgated last week.
But what does a 50% attendance mean for you, for your costs, the people you have to deploy, and so on?
Yeah, it's a two-edged sword, the question, because it's not only the stadium that's involved in the planning and execution of events. Specifically the various clubs that uses stadia as their home venues. That cost, or the majority of that cost, comes down to the clubs. Your question has got merit in the sense that we now need to create an additional layer, and I think that the chairman of the PSL referred to that today as well. An additional layer of security to do these checks for the vaccination certificate and all the negative COVID tests. So that's definitely going to increase and hit the pockets of the event organizers and the clubs.
I mean, if you're going to put that additional layer, do you, just from what you know, I mean, are the takings, going to make up for, or will they be able to carry, that additional cost?
It's difficult to say. We'll need to test it in the weeks to come, but I see the glass half full there, not half empty. I think this is a challenge to venues, to event organizers, to sporting clubs, to focus on the fan experience, the stadium experience, and to entice people to come to venues. If we're going to continue on the trend we had pre-COVID, that's not going to cover the cost, but we need to get more fans with bums on seats in the stadium.
And then I don't know if you've done any sort of comparative studies or looked at people or countries or jurisdictions that have already sort of started allowing people to come to stadiums, or where they did say, accept 50% attendance, whether they were in fact able to then, carry those costs and run an efficient, events management system without having to take knocks.
We did some studies, and it's always difficult to compare, but if you look at the EPL now and the Six Nations that concluded 2 weeks ago, they had full stadia at the latter part of their seasons. They had measures in place, I think quite similar to what we're going to implement at the stadiums now. And they were able to manage their revenue streams to produce a profit. I think if it's a challenge to us, but I think we've got the expertise, we've got the know-how to turn this around into still a profitable situation for all involved.
And from conversations that have been held between and among key stakeholders, including government, are you aware of any assistance that may come to sort of mitigate the problems you are foreseeing? In other words, is there no way of taking care of that additional layer that has to be put, to make sure that the protocols are observed, but also the work of administering, this whole thing of whether it's, certificates or whether you have taken a jab, who's going to take care of those things, and whether government is, for example, interested or keen to also come to the party?
I must be honest, at my level and at the venues we manage, there's not been engagement by government on that point. We'll surely be monitored, but I think the chairman of the PSL referred to that today as well when he said there's a lot of obligations on the clubs and accountability on clubs to ensure the execution of this. So I don't foresee government nationally or locally coming to assist in any manner or form. I think that will be up to the event organizers, the home clubs and the stadiums.
But before COVID, where especially the big stadiums that were built, prior to the 2010 World Cup, I'm talking about the big stadiums here in Johannesburg, in Durban, in Gqeberha, Cape Town, and so on. Were those stadiums running profitably before COVID?
It's difficult for me to speak on their behalf. What I can tell you is that the four stadia we manage, being FNB, Orlando, Rand and Dobsonville, we're the only privately owned management company. And our agreement with the city of Joburg, our management agreement differs from the other agreements with local authorities, where they might have assistance from their municipalities or local government. We're managing these stadia on a full financial risk basis. The flip side of that coin is that we're entitled to commercialize. Now, in pre-COVID times, when you were clever and you managed your business well, obviously there were a profit in that. During COVID times, that was closed in totality. The amount of events we hosted was but a drop in the ocean compared to the expenses. It would be unreasonable for me to comment on their profitability, but I think there were challenges. Mm-hmm.
And what's the one thing that you'd say COVID has taught you or has taught your industry? Something that perhaps you took for granted. And with everything that has happened over the past 2 years, you know, you perhaps going to look at your model perhaps a little differently.
Yeah, I think I said the other day, if this pandemic was for a period of 5 months and we then proceeded as normal, it would have been the best thing ever, because it gave you an opportunity to sit back and to reflect on what you were doing, whether it's the right thing, whether it's viable, and whether you should continue on that. Unfortunately, it continued for 2 years, so we had a lot of time to think, and maybe we got a bit event unfit in this period of time as well. But I think that the main thing is to look differently at event hosting, to look differently at the stadium experience, to look differently at the fan experience. And I think that will evolve not only to stadium authorities, but I think sporting clubs, sporting unions, event organizers will have a different take on how they host events. If you have a look at ticketing, at the concessionaire system, a cashless system, a digital ticketing platform in hybrid with an outlet sale platform. So I think in relation to the stadium experience and fan experience, we learned a lot of lessons during this past 25 years, and we learned to be grateful as well.
Mm-hmm. That's why we're going to end it. Thank you very much for your time and insights this evening. Betty Grobler, who is the CEO of Stadium Management South Africa, reacting, of course, to the PSL announcement today that fans are now going to be allowed back at stadiums where soccer matches are being played. Also today, the Minister of Cooperative Governance, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, announcing that the national state of disaster will in all likelihood be lifted before the 15th of April, and over the next 2 days the public is being asked to comment on the regulations that are being published today, which would then influence the government's decision as to how we go forward. After the break, we'll speak to Communications and Digital Technologies Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni about the big switch that begins this coming Friday. Don't go ahead. Well, among the people who have spoken today about digital migration is the EFF. The party is calling on government to make sure that all households have set-top boxes before switching off the analog broadcast signal. The party is concerned about excluding an estimated 8 million, mainly poor South Africans, from free-to-air digital terrestrial television. Government is in the final stages of South Africa's digital migration and plans to switch off analog signals in the next couple of months. The EFF further calls on the administration to use its SASA database to help in the distribution of set-top boxes. Long delayed, but South Africa's migration to a digital signal is finally going ahead. The process, however, is not without problems and hasn't run short of opponents and critics. Broadcasters, community organizations, political parties say there's a lot wrong with the process. And I'll be speaking to the Minister of Communications shortly, who's going to give us a status report, and will also speak to critics and opponents concerns. She will be joining us shortly after this short ad break. Going ahead. The process, however, is not without problems and hasn't run short of opponents and critics. Broadcasters, community organizations, as well as political parties say there's a lot wrong with the process, but on the line to give us a status report and to speak to some of those critics and opponents' concerns is the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni. Minister, good evening. Thanks very much for your time this evening. And, much as this process directly affects millions of people, most of the discussions have really been, above many people's heads, and very quickly, we don't have a lot of time because, technology is not playing ball with us this evening. Briefly remind us of the importance and the benefits of this process.
Good evening to you, Vuyo, and your viewers. And I like the question that you've asked to say, what is the importance and benefits for this? Where I come from, and majority of where South Africans reside in rural areas, we do not have access to a network. So people have to get into buses and taxis to just make a phone call. In the evening, women who are pregnant cannot get assistance when they go into labor, to call an ambulance or to call police for assistance or whatever, because they do not have network. So what the digital migration does, the broadcast digital migration does, is going to allow the mobile operators to then have access to that spectrum that will advance connectivity in our country. And as a commitment that we've made as a governing party and as cabinet, is that we want to have South Africa connected, all South Africans have access to internet by year 2024. And that is the commitment that can only be achieved with this migration concluded. And it's true that there will be millions affected, but those millions affected, there is room for two things. One, for those who qualify for government assistance, to then go and apply for government assistance. Even with the court ruling that confirms the need to close digital migration and allowed us space to conclude the connection of the 507,000 South Africans who had registered by the 31st of October 2021. The digital migration is going to take place on the 30th of June. But we have not closed the applications for those who qualify, which means those households earning 3,500 and less, and those ones who are unemployed. And so that's the requirement. But those who do not fall within that category of people to be assistance, how do we mitigate that? We have gotten the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition to then, I think now it is concluding, to go and start a process of banning or prohibiting the importation of analog televisions in the country so that people can buy digital televisions with tuners can tune. But also, added to that, majority of households in the country already have digital televisions. On our website, we've got a list of more than 194 models of digital televisions that South Africans already have in this country that they can tune in and access their digital television. And above all, you've got already over 11 million households, 11.5 million households in this country, which leaves out the balance in terms of, let's say, latest statistics that we use, only of 3.5 who do not have access. As the court has ruled, the court has agreed that we cannot wait for and where they are to say at some point they'll wake up and come and register for assistance. We cannot give them the benefits that are better than when we're still on analog TV. The court has ruled to say, look, digital migration must be concluded and must be concluded speedily. The process started in 2006. It cannot be delayed any further. So we appreciate that court judgment and the fact that ETV has been slapped with costs to say they must pay the cost to the minister, 50% of the cost to the minister, and 100% of the cost to ICASA and the chairperson of ICASA and Vodacom, who are party to the case. So where we are sitting, those households that qualify, that earn 3,500 per month or less, they must go and register with the nearest post office or STB registrations.gov.za. You can use that even on your feature phone. You're going to be able to access that.
Now, where I'm going to go through the stakeholder by stakeholder, if you allow me. You have, for example, your Save Free TV. A campaign which says that around 14 million South Africans are going to be left without a TV, and that is wrong. Are they missing something, or are you saying that those people are going to be catered for, and this is how and this is when?
I want to read what the judge has said about that. that government's responsibility to assist households still watching TV via analog transmitters is limited to those households that meet the government set criteria and register for such assistance. In addition, government has clearly articulated the criteria for those who will qualify for government government support. It would be unreasonable to allow for a situation where an unknown variable, which is this unregistered households that are spoken about by free-to-air TV, is allowed to hold a process that will eventually be of benefit to all citizens and where government must meet its international obligations. And therefore, we have said to avoid this missing people that say free-to-air TV coalition is talking about, we are requesting and pleading with the this coalition to go and mobilize the very people that it claims are there to come and register, because the court has also ruled that, has also determined that it's not everyone who is indigent, that meaning they were everyone who cannot afford, who owns an analog TV. And it doesn't mean everyone who owns an analog TV cannot afford the means to migrate on their own. Because the fact of the matter is that the process started in 2006. We first set a policy date of 2011 that we didn't switch off. And then we went to 2015, which is the ITU, International Telecommunications Union date of June 2015, which we did not meet. And we cannot be waiting forever. The consequences are dire for the country. We continue to live in a digitally exclusive country where technology could have been advancing access to other things like access to education for children in rural areas who do not have access to better maths and science teachers, laboratories, and so forth, who can then be able to access e-learning, and through the e-learning that is provided for by the spectrum that needs to be released by the broadcasting services, is going to then assist the majority of those children. And I'm just using that as a specific example. So free-to-air TV coalition must join us in calling for more people, because we won't keep the application process perpetually open, because we need to close that and move on to the next things. So where we are, we're going to keep it for a period, but we're going to announce a date to say by when will the applications close. But we want the partnership with everybody who claims to speak for the poor to go and mobilize with us for the poor to come and apply and will be supported by government. Remember, for you and to your viewers, government has never said we're going to support only 3.5 million South African. Government had to work with a budget, of which the budget is for 3.5. And we said, if you bring us 5 million, you bring us 8 million, whatever number you bring, we are going to assist them, but they must register. So without them registering, there's no way we can know where they are. The court also acknowledges that point and has reaffirmed that point, that the unknown variable cannot be used to hold ransom the process of digital migration.
And to the SABC's concerns?
The SABC are like children in a household. When they have concerns, they must talk they must talk their issues in the family. I've always argued and I've always supported the SABC personally, and I've done all the things that I could to support the SABC to make sure that it's sustainable. We have worked well with the SABC in the past, and I believe that there is room for us and the SABC to work together, but we must find each other. I do not believe that when you maybe it's the culture where I'm raised. When you have a seat at the table, you need to go and jump in the streets. You must come to the table and we talk at the table where you are. So they must not be jumping in the streets. They must come to the table where they have a seat firmly, which is guaranteed to engage. Because the issues they are raising, they are not different from the issues that have been dismissed by the court from both ETV and the Safe Free-to-Air Coalition and the other parties that were in court, Media Monitoring Africa and them.
Where did hell break loose, so to speak, Minister? Because, I mean, if we are saying family, I mean your family and tradition or whatever we call it, saw or previously saw you and the SABC and other stakeholders, I would imagine, talking about these things without having to go outside. What happened in this instance? How did you get to talk past one another?
You must ask the board of the SABC that question. I can only say, given what has happened, I had to exercise my responsibility to Parliament to say the reports that I had submitted on the bona fides of their accuracy, when they are contradicted in a public statement, I must then alert Parliament that I cannot continue to leave those reports there. That's why I formally withdrawn, provisionally withdrawn the reports until the SABC clarifies themselves and their position, so that I cannot be accused later of misleading Parliament. So when the SABC has clarified themselves at the table, they've requested a meeting, and I'll meet with them, and we'll move forward. We are, remember, the board members of the SABC, and because it's not me as a person, I represent government. Board members of the SABC, their term is going to end now in October, but government shareholding of the SABC remains, and responsibility towards the SABC remains. That's why government bails out the SABC. So it doesn't matter whether it's a Kumbuzo sitting here, or it will be a Vuyo Mvoko tomorrow sitting in this position as Minister of Communications responsible for the SABC. The SABC will always be supported by government. So it's not it's a thing that we will resolve, and the board are fully aware of the many battles are fought for them and alongside them.
The letter is quite harsh that has been circulating. Do you still stick by it, or do you believe that the meeting you are going to have with the SABC board will resolve these issues?
I didn't circulate a letter to the SABC. I wrote a letter to the SABC, to the board of the SABC. I do not know what is circulated. I do not know the authenticity of the letter that is circulated. I have not seen what is circulated. I've got snippets of what is reported in the media. So I cannot comment on the letters that are either leaked or that are either faked. I trust that the bona fides of the board of the SABC towards their fiduciary responsibility and to act with dignity and not to bring the company to disrepute is intact, and that includes the provisions of the memorandum of incorporation that has stipulated a mechanism of communicating with the minister and in confidence and in trust. So I can't respond to the letters. I do not know what was circulated and what was not circulated. I'll leave that to the SABC to say what did they circulate. What I know is that I have a conversation with the SABC, and with that conversation, we are going to meet within this week, and we'll conclude the matters that we have to conclude with the board of the SABC from a shareholder and a board that is an accounting authority, and I'll be acting from my position as an executive authority of the SABC.
Quick one, last point on this one before I move quickly to two other points I want to raise with you, Minister, in the little time we have left. I don't know if you have seen some political parties are now asking for the SABC to resist intimidation or anything that would mean that you can unilaterally withdraw support, your support to the SABC or the government's support to the SABC. Your thoughts on that?
I've not heard what the political parties are saying, but what I'm saying is that I have my own executive authority responsibilities, both to the board of the SABC, but also to Parliament. And I have to exercise those responsibilities because I cannot be part to a process that puts me in disrepute at some point. I must allow the process that the SABC have offered an opportunity to deal with that, and then they'll clarify themselves, and if I have to clarify myself, I'll clarify myself. I was in the portfolio committee this morning. I've clarified to the portfolio committee. I've written a letter to the speaker and to request the withdrawal of information because it contradicted some of the information that is submitted in the quarterly reports of the SABC, but I've given the SABC board an opportunity to clarify that information. And given that the board of the SABC has requested a meeting with me, I've then said I'm going to wait and not to notify the Minister of Finance of my intention to not transfer the next tranches until we have clarity on the accuracy and the integrity of the reports that have been submitted, whether what is genuine is what is in the media statement issued by the SABC or whether what's in the reports, because the two cannot coexist. Thank you.
Now, Mr. On the with what we're going to do with the spectrum. Last week, I had some organizations here, discussing this matter, and they feel that there are several weaknesses, on the back of the auctioning of the spectrum. They believe, for example, that it continues. The duopoly is going to continue. They believe that a competition is not being encouraged because small players are being sidelined, and the idea that this whole exercise was, among other things, meant to encourage competition sounds like a lofty idea, but it's going to fail dismally.
No, thank you for that question, Vuyo, because we need to clarify this. When we went to cabinet for cabinet to concur to the withdrawal of the WON and the amendment of the WON policy, you should recall when the WON was designed, it was designed a long time ago, and technology advances. And even at the CSI art study, there was a size of the WON that was determined to be 115 megahertz that should be available for the WON. But what currently we're sitting with is 85 megahertz of the WON that's available. But that model is overtaken by events. What we have undertaken, and that's what a public undertaking, that in the next few weeks we're going to publish a document that we are consulting with South Africans, but we'll also consult with industry on how we're bringing the empowerment, meaningful empowerment of and participation of the medium and small and medium enterprise in the spectrum space. You are forgetting that we don't have the spectrum. Yes, it's limited and it's rare, but we have got options and opportunities that we can use to do the empowerment. And let's have a discussion about whether what our intervention we are proposing is much better than what the WON would have proposed. The WON would have benefited a few, but what we are proposing now will be more beneficial to the serious SMME players in the sector, because we believe that we must do meaningful empowerment, and also that which can sustain the country to change the face of competition in this country.
Okay, so the WON issue is being addressed.
Yes, that's what we have said. If you check the Gazette notice, we indicated that we will publish an alternative policy to address competition matters and also empowerment matters.
There's a proposition. One of the guests I had was saying that given that we still have unsold network, this is where smaller players can be helped to build their own cheaper network and provide access.
Let's wait for the proposal we're going to table, and we can have a discussion, and they can enhance that proposal. So I'm not immune to the proposals. I don't believe that me and the team that I work with, we know it all. We believe that we can always be better with better brains. There are better brains out there. Let's allow us to put the proposal on the table, and let's engage on that proposal and enhance that proposal.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Unfortunately, Minister, time's against us. Technology didn't play ball. But thank you very much for the time you were able to give us this evening. Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies there, responding to some of the issues that have been raised by a whole range of players around digital migration, spectrum, and a whole host of other issues I would have wanted to discuss with her. But unfortunately, we didn't have a great deal of time. The little time we had is all we had. Till we talk again tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. Have a good night.